Okay. Good. It's afternoon for me, so either good morning or good afternoon. My name is Candice Gancerez, and I decided to do my final presentation on corporal punishment in education. And so that is what we're going to be talking about today. I have this little picture here that I thought kind of ironic and funny. It says we have a zero tolerance policy against violence, and the kid is about to receive corporal punishment. So let's just dive in. All right. What is corporal punishment? And so corporal punishment is going to be a type of discipline in which students are paddled or hit or slapped in response to some type of behavior that the child has exhibited. The hope of corporal punishment is to obviously stop the behavior and prevent it from happening again. But corporal punishment has also been used in the past as a means of using the child as an example of what others don't want to happen to them. Okay, so where is it legal? Corporal punishment is actually only legal in 19 states at this point. Georgia is included in one of those states, but if you'll look at the map, we are in the lower percentage of how much corporal punishment is actually used. And that is because many of our schools around the Atlanta area and northern Georgia don't use corporal punishment anymore. It's mostly in South Georgia. So our percentage is quite low compared to some of the other states that are around us. And if you do notice that much of the corporal punishment that is happening is in southern states of the United States. And we'll kind of talk about why that is when we look at the history of corporal punishment as to why it's mostly in these southern states, although you might be already formulating a guess or a speculation as to why that is. So 19 states that still use corporal punishment, and Georgia is included while we are on the lower level of how much it is used. All right, so corporal punishment has somewhat of a complicated history. That is to be expected because it is such a controversial topic. So it was actually brought over during European settlement. So corporal punishment is going way back to the beginning, really, of our country. And it was brought over from Europeans that were coming. So when we talk about this type of corporal punishment, we're really talking about corporal punishment in general. So this would have been for adults that maybe broke a law or did something that was frowned upon. Corporal punishment at this point would not have just been applied to schools. In fact, there were not many schools at this time, if any, and so it was mostly used in adult situations. And then, of course, in the household as a means to punish children that didn't listen to their parents. So, as we talked about on that map, most of it takes place now in the southern states. And I fully believe that is because it was favored originally by religious connections. So, a lot of people that defend corporal punishment like to bring up the Bible verse about sparing the rod, spoiling the child, which means to, if you don't discipline your child enough, then you're basically going to create a little monster. And so because it was backed up, so to speak, by all of these religious people, it was very, very favored. And I fully believe that is why we still see it mostly in these southern states, is because we are considered that Bible Belt. And so we are, even though we're growing, we're still very traditional when it comes to certain aspects of school. So as early as the 1600s, corporal punishment was used in schools and universities. I found it quite interesting that it was mostly used in universities at this time. and that when these college students were disruptive or broke the rules and did things that they weren't supposed to, went against policies, that they actually had whipping posts in dormitories, like in the hallways. They had them in the cafeteria. They had them like in the middle of the yard in front of the university, and that they would go out and punish these, girls or boys, young men and women, in front of everybody in the university that was there. And so this surprised me to begin with, but then the more I started thinking about that time period in the 1600s, we're still talking about a time where adults would have received corporal punishment for many of the things that they did. And so then it started not to seem so strange to me. So when corporal punishment was started to use in school, we're picturing the one-room schoolhouse with one teacher in there handling a majority of the kids in that area, so ranging from ages young to older. And so the teachers were allowed to handle the majority of corporal punishment because they were the ones there. They kind of wore the hat of all, positions of school that schools have now, because it was that small environment with one teacher. Another thing I found fascinating is that in certain states, teachers still can administer corporal punishment to this day. I don't think it's very common just because it could lead to a lot of liability issues, but it is still legal in certain states and it's still in their laws for education. And those schools still include it in their policies and their handbook that teachers can administer corporal punishment when they need to. I also found it quite interesting in a set of laws about teachers using corporal punishment that in Georgia, teachers are not allowed to handle the corporal punishment. But if there's an incident in which a student is trying to inflict pain on a teacher, then a teacher can defend herself using a means of corporal punishment if she needs to or he needs to. And same thing with if they are trying to break up a disruption or like a fight where students are injuring each other, they can use their hands as a means to stop the children. So just a little interesting fact about teachers in Georgia and what their position to use corporal punishment is. So the main part of history that comes with corporal punishment and when things kind of changed was in 1977. There was a Supreme Court ruling that said corporal punishment laws would be decided by the state. And so we're going to look at that case and all that it entails. But this was the game changer, because once it was decided by the states, and that's when we started to see, starting with New Jersey, many states just kind of pull away from it and say, no, we don't want to use that anymore. Now that we can make our own law about it, we're getting rid of it. So when we look at Georgia's history, administrators are now the only ones with the authority to administer corporal punishment. Like I said before, teachers have those certain leeways when it comes to like self-defense and student fights, but it is administrators and they must have a witness. And it also must be proven that all other consequences were used first. So pulling the student from the classroom to take a time out into the hallway, or spending some time in school suspension, losing certain privileges, all those things that we can use as consequences must be documented and proven first, just in case there was a situation in which a parent wanted to sue the school. They could say, here's our laws, here's what we did. So the first case we're going to look at is that big case that I was just talking about that kind of made the changing factor, in which states were then allowed to make the law themselves. And so this one was Ingram versus Wright. It actually looks at two different incidents that happened at the school, and then the parents of the main two students kind of went together and presented a case. So the first incident happened on October 1st in 1970. A boy named Roosevelt Andrews, and 15 other boys received corporal punishment for being tardy from Assistant Principal Barnes. Solomon Barnes accused them of being tardy, and Roosevelt Adams kind of went back and said, no, we weren't. We actually had 2 minutes until it was time to be in class. And so because Andrews fully believed that he was not tardy, he then resisted the corporal punishment from the assistant principal, which kind of resulted in Barnes just swinging and hitting Andrews where he could. So Andrews was struck on the arm, the back, and the neck, and creating some pretty brutal bruises and lacerations. So that was the first incident. The second incident was only 5 days later and involved the Principal Wright, who removed the main student, James Ingram, and others from disrupting a class to apply corporal punishment. Well, whenever Ingram was time to get his paddling, he resisted Principal Wright, and so Principal Wright called in Assistant Principal Barnes. Barnes held him down, and Principal Wright proceeded to initiate 20 hits on James Ingram for resisting and disrupting class. These hits caused some good bit of injury, and Ingram actually went to the hospital for it, had lots of bruising, received, pain pills for the injuries that he received. And that is when Andrews and Ingram's parents decided to get together and sue Principal Wright and Assistant Principal Barnes. So when they first went to court, the case was not moved on because there was a lack of evidence, so to speak. And with Andrews, they made the claim that if he would have just taken his, he was tardy, it was not going to be a really harsh punishment. It was just going to be a couple of pats on the back, and then he went about his business. And so they claimed that it was his fault for resisting, that he was hit in the areas that he was hit in. Now, with Ingram, they had a little bit harder time dismissing because he was hit for 20 times, and he did receive that hospital care, but they still claimed that there was not enough. Well, the Fifth Circuit of the U.S. Courts of Appeals claimed that the extent of the punishment went against Andrews and Ingram's 8th and 14th Amendment rights, and so they took the case on and went through all of the process again, looked at the evidence, looked at the statements from the hospital about Ingram, and then they took a vote. Well, the court decided in a 5-4 decision, very, very close, that the 8th and 14th Amendment rights didn't prevent corporal punishment in the school, and because of that, they could do nothing about the case. So they claimed that the 5 that chose not to grant Andrews and Ingram with the win, so to speak, said that the 8th Amendment It has nothing to do with corporal punishment because it has everything to do with criminal actions. And so it only protects, those that are doing crime from cruel and unusual punishment, not students in school. And then they made the claim that it didn't go against their 14th Amendment rights because they knew the consequence of misbehavior in the school. They were aware of the use of corporal punishment. They were the ones that resisted, even though they were given a chance just to take the punishment and move on. So very controversial here. And the four justices that did not agree with our small majority were very, very vocal about their disagreement in the fact that Andrews and Ingram did not get what was fair. And even though maybe the 8th and 14th Amendments were not what should be applied here, there should have been something done. And so they were very, very adamant about that, very vocal about it, although it did not change anything other than really the fact that after this is when they decided states are going to handle these laws about corporal punishment, and we're kind of washing our hands, and we're only here if it absolutely gets to us. So major decisions here. And this little attachment right here, if you click on the arrow, then you can listen to the full reading of Justice Lewis Powell, which is the Supreme Court justice that announced the ruling and everything that entailed with that. So just a little bit more information about what was decided, and kind of cool to listen to because it's the actual, reading. It's actually him talking. So, all right, the second case that we're going to look at is Garcia and Miera. And this is about a 9-year-old girl that takes place in a elementary school in New Mexico in 1982. The girl's name is Teresa Garcia, and she had two incidents in which corporal punishment was used, and then her parents sued the school and went to court from there. So the first incident, Garcia was sent to the office for hitting a boy who kicked her first, because she felt that she had a reasonable reason to hit the boy who kicked her. As a 9-year-old, she resisted. And so when she resisted, the principal called in a teacher to hold her up by the ankles. That picture does not set well in my brain at all. A 9-year-old girl, held by her ankles, while the principal paddles her. And then to make it even worse, the principal struck her 5 times with a damaged paddle. So the paddle had a split right down the middle. That when Principal Miera struck Garcia, it actually pinched and then caused a deep cut on her backside. So, yeah, not okay. Her parents were not okay with that, as I don't believe any parents would be. They had to go and seek medical attention for it. And then they asked for a meeting with Principal Miera and just simply asked that if Garcia was to get in trouble again before corporal punishment was used, they would like to be contacted to make sure that it was a reasonable behavior offense to get corporal punishment and that it was going to be done the right way. So, very reasonable request coming from parents that could have completely, jumped off the deep end with this, because we're talking about some major bruising and cuts to this young girl. So then, not very long after, a second incident occurs in which Garcia talks about how one of the teachers was kissing one of the students' parents on a field trip. And they didn't like that, apparently, even though the teacher admitted to being in a relationship with that parent and doing the kissing. They didn't like the fact that Garcia was going around talking about it, and so they sent her to the office. Well, Principal Miera decided that corporal punishment was the appropriate punishment again, did not contact the parents, and began to paddle her 2 times, at which point Garcia started resisting and saying, "You need to call my mom, you need to call my mom, you're supposed to call my mom." But instead of calling her parents, Principal Miera called in the administrative assistant to hold her over the chair for the remainder of her 3 paddles. So again, she was struck 5 times total. It does not say if it was with the same paddle. I'm assuming because there were no substantial injuries that this would have been a new paddle. But no parent notification like they requested, and held down again against her will. So parents said, "Oh, no. Okay, we were nice about it the first time. Now we're not going to be nice. We're suing you. We're going to court." So long court case as to, again, which there was not very much evidence to be presented to the court, other than witness statements, which were a little murky. They were able to show where she sought medical attention the first time, and the injuries that were caused by the damaged paddle. However, Garcia lost the court case because in the end they ruled that the administrators had what was called qualified immunity, because the use of corporal punishment was made very clear at the beginning of the school year. And so qualified immunity doesn't sit very well with me. But that is the incident that happened with Garcia. All right, so why this issue? Well, initially I started looking at this issue just because it is so controversial, and my school still uses it, as we are very deep in the south of Georgia. And so I just kind of wanted to see, especially since there's kind of this movement going on of just corporal punishment in general, where parents aren't really using, the spanking tactic anymore. And there's all this research that's coming out about how corporal punishment causes much more damage. And you've got this new era of gentle parenting coming in, and we're kind of seeing that same parallel in public schools. We're kind of moving away from that corporal punishment and bringing in things like PBIS, which really encourages the incentives for positive behavior and the rewards for positive behavior, just really trying to get away from the negative that comes with corporal punishment. Yet you still have these states and these certain areas of states and school districts that are very adamant that corporal punishment works and that corporal punishment is needed. And so to me, this is such an issue just because there are 2 sides of it, and they are very, very extreme. There's not really a in the middle, like, corporal punishment is okay sometimes. You have very few people that think that. It's either people that think corporal punishment is the way to go, or you have people that say corporal punishment has to go. And so looking at my personal situation, corporal punishment is still used at the school that I work at. I have witnessed corporal punishment happening. Now, we do take very serious the fact that all other consequences have to be enforced, and usually multiple times before we go to the option of corporal punishment. We are very upfront, though, about the fact that it can be used in our handbook that students and parents receive at the beginning of the year. We do it in a very safe, so to speak, type of way where there is a witness in the room to make sure that everyone is doing what they need to do. It's a certain paddle used. And then parents are notified that their child is receiving corporal punishment. We don't have a lot of issues with the use of corporal punishment until after the fact. So our parents have to sign a handbook at the beginning of the years, with all the policies and stuff like that, and included is corporal punishment. And it's probably safe to say that a lot of parents don't read the whole handbook. Just kind of one of those things that it is what it is. And so in the handbook, it states that if they don't want their student to receive corporal punishment, they have to send a written notice stating so. They do. Most of them do not. And then once their child has been paddled for whatever reason, then that's when they kind of want to say, "Whoa, wait a minute! I don't want my student to get corporal punishment anymore." And so we have not really seen a lot of "I'm going to sue the school" kind of thing, but it does become an issue after they get paddled to where the parent is like, "Wait a minute, no," kind of deal. So I was also kind of surprised when I was kind of examining and analyzing corporal punishment and all the controversy that comes with it, that there aren't many cases dealing with it, especially since the major Supreme Court ruling in which states were allowed to decide the laws. And I'm on the fence about why that is. Is it because the states that do allow it have, stuck to their guns that it's the right thing to do? Or is it because there's not so much corporal punishment anymore? Because there are so many states that aren't using it, we don't see that many cases dealing with it anymore. And so that surprised me just a little bit. And it also surprised me that the cases I did see, the schools won majority of the time. I mean, I'm thinking about Garcia, the case we just talked about, and this 9-year-old child being held up by her ankles, and nothing is done simply because the administrators have qualified immunity, just blows my mind. And so, a lot of schools don't use corporal punishment because they are afraid of the liability, when in fact, looking at court cases historically, the schools have nothing to worry about. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. And then looking at corporal punishment today, it's fading out very slowly. We still see it in the South. I believe that is still because of those religious reasons. We're still in the Bible Belt where people still defend it. So I believe that it will continue to fade out, but I do believe, especially in those states that we saw that high percentage in, like Alabama and Mississippi, that it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to take a lot of parents kind of protesting the use of it if they even care. So that is what I found on corporal punishment. This link right here is just a video with a little bit more information. It kind of talks about much of the stuff I talked about and then goes a little bit deeper. But the fun thing on here is that there's a quiz where you can see how much you know. I kind of took it before I started just to see if how knowledgeable I was on the topic. But just a little fun to see how much you know about corporal punishment and how much you might need to know if you are in a school that still uses it. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that your brain has been intrigued a little bit, and that you're kind of thinking about which side of the controversial topic of corporal punishment you might be on. Thanks again.